morning, everyone. My name is DeBode. It's great to be here, back with you all. Good to see you. I'm the director of Abundant Grace Coastside Worker over in Half Moon Bay. Operate a workforce development center for people experiencing homelessness. We opened a building there in 2020. And you all have been accompanying us on our journey for many years. And you've witnessed and been a part of the progress. We have a center on Kelly, right in downtown Half Moon Bay, where people can take showers and do laundry. We have a couple work programs. And it's just a beautiful project where we get to kind of walk with people who are experiencing homelessness and accompany them towards taking better steps in their lives, particularly around housing, employment, sobriety, health, and well-being. So I could talk a lot about that, but I want to start by introducing my kids. This is Javier and Liliana. Liliana is 19, that wonderful age we've all been, where you're kind of on the cusp of, you're an adult and life is ahead of you and you don't yet see the path, but it's taking shape. She's taking a class at CSM and working at the YMCA, doing working with kids in the afternoons, which is really neat. That's where her interest and passion lies. So we're just waiting to see how she blossoms in the next few years. And Javier is 14, and he's a freshman at Half Moon Bay High School, and he's deep in school, and he's also taken up track and running cross country, and we're really happy for him and how things are going in his life too. So they love being the center of attention too. Okay, I'll take the attention back. So when I was getting ready for this weekend and kind of doing, one thing I love about researching homily, a sermon when you're going to preach is you always learn something new, right? Did you guys know that there were 3 other people in the tomb besides Lazarus? Yeah, you didn't know that, huh? That's why, because Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth, right? Oh, sorry, it had to be said. That's a moldy oldie, as they say. So I want to talk a little bit about context. Dan Berrigan talks about reading ourselves into Scripture, and kind of the journey of faith is constantly, from the time that we're young till the time that we're old, is narrating our lives into the story, Like we know we're following Jesus if some of the key motifs and themes of the Gospels are really forefront in our lives, right? Not just on our minds. We don't just think about the parables, think about the commandments and the call and the example of Jesus and what that would look like today. We do it, right? So it's when you do it and you read yourself into these stories, then that's one of the hallmarks of what it means to follow Jesus, is that we find all these similarities. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about this particular passage. And then, so halfway through the week, I thought I was all focused on Lazarus, and I have tons of notes. And then I thought, wait a minute, this community, I know you don't want to only hear that, but you probably are interested in what has been going on in Half Moon Bay since January 23rd. And then that opened up this other kind of window of reflecting on Lazarus through that light. So I want to try to bring it together. It may be a little clumsy, but bear with me. First and foremost, we must constantly keep top of mind that Jesus is announcing the coming of the nonviolent kingdom of God. What Jesus is doing in all the Gospels, particularly in John, you hear it in this chapter. Jesus has been doing the works of mercy, healing, telling parables and stories, challenging people, and we're getting to the point where he's about to go towards the Last Supper, crucifixion, death, resurrection, and then the appearances in John. This is the last healing in the Gospel of John. This is a moment, I think, where it's a bit of a climactic moment in the Gospel. If we stand back, I think, and try to take a bird's eye view of this story, I'll take a cue from theologian Monica Hellwig, who says, look, when you read Lazarus, Lazarus represents all of creation, life, humanity, right? And the powers of death, the culture of death that is fully animating the Roman Empire and, frankly, the church hierarchy. That is what is at stake here, right? Mary and Martha. Mary, who sits at Jesus' feet and prays. Martha, who's a doer, right? The wholeness of what we are called to is both of those things in our lives. This particular passage also has some great moments for the disciples. They come out looking as awful as they usually do. I call them the Keystone Apostles. They're always misinterpreting. They're trying to be first. They think they get it. They don't get it. Over and over, they don't get it. And it's kind of us too, right? We're trying really hard. We don't really get it sometimes, but sometimes we do, right? And then there are the professional mourners in this story. The ones who are weeping outside with Martha and Mary, and I think they represent people who know what's going on but don't really do anything about it. They're like professional pundits on the news, talking heads, and they don't really do much about it. And then after this passage, which we didn't hear in the reading, is the plot to kill Jesus takes shape. The church leaders and the Romans are like, well, better that one man die than the whole nation. If he keeps going, the temple and the nation will be destroyed. The Romans will wipe us out, which is in essence scapegoating. The very origin of violence itself is on the table, which is scapegoating. We have to diminish and dehumanize the other in order to do violence. So this story starts out, Lazarus was sick, and he was at Martha and Mary's house. And that, by the way, Mary, it says in the text, the one who poured perfume on the Lord's feet. We don't know, we don't know if it's the same Mary, but nonetheless, what this passage does is pull together, like so many gospel stories, in the first sentence or two, the stage is set, right? We're in Bethany, right outside of Jerusalem. This is where Mary poured oil on Jesus' feet. This is where the fig tree is. This is the Last Supper, I think, takes place in Jerusalem, but they go from Bethany to the Last Supper. So what's called into the forefront of our mind at the moment is Mary pouring perfume. The apostles, again, clumsily state, hey, we could have sold that perfume and given it to the poor. And Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you, right? Now that statement is, for years and years in my life, I thought it was just like this fatalistic, depressing. I'm like, why did he say that, That seems so horrible. And like giving up on social justice or something. It doesn't make any sense, right? So it's actually a citation from Deuteronomy 15, which is part of the Sabbath and Jubilee practices of the early Confederacy. And it states really clearly, the poor you'll always have with you, as long as you hold tight-fisted to your money, as long as you don't share with people in need, as long as you don't take care of the sick and the widow and the alien, the immigrant, right? Then the poor you'll always have with you. But there's an alternative. And this is what Jesus did. In one line, right? The poor you will always have with you. He's telling the apostles, John is repeating this to tell us, it's not necessary that the poor you'll always have with you, because there is another way. And this way that gets spoken during this chapter is the way of the resurrected one. I am the resurrection, I am the light, I am the way and the truth, right? Follow that path. The apostles, of course, say, are you nuts? Basically, right? He's like, I'm going to go back and see Lazarus in Bethany. But Rabbi, they just tried to kill you there. Are you crazy going back there? He says, are there not 12 hours of light in the day? So again, we are people who trust that if you walk in the light, you walk with that passion for justice and righteousness, all will be well. We must go because my friend Lazarus is sick. My friend. Jesus uses the term a couple times here in the next chapter as well. I don't call you servants, I call you friends. Jesus is elevating this sense of egalitarianism, and it's so important, I think, because a lot of times we have a tendency to lift the whole idea of following Jesus so high on a pedestal that none of us can approximate it, But if we have that mindset that Jesus invites us to, that we are friends, we are one, not that one is better or less than or more skilled at, but we all are on this shared common journey to help each other. That's it, Then I want to touch on this. Both Mary and Martha, you heard Gina was reading this, right? Both of them say the exact same thing when they see Jesus. If only you had been here, our brother would not have died, right? And it happens a couple paragraphs away, and it creates what theologians call a sandwich. In the middle is the important part, right? If you had been here, he would not have died. And I'm sure there are a few ways to interpret this particular passage. Here's how I interpret it. If only you had been here, he would not have died. Because we can't, right? If only Jesus were here, homelessness would be solved. If only Jesus were here, war would be over, and we'd get rid of nukes, and we'd heal our climate, right? If only, if only. Jesus does not have time for if-onlys, right? There is no time for if-onlys. Life is at stake. If Jesus is, the author of life, the one who calls us to the fullness of life, who announces this way of life, it is a way that is contrary to the ways of death. We are supposed to reject the ways of death, avoid practices that contribute to death, and be people who live in the light. I am the resurrection, the way, and the truth, right? We are called to that. That's the meaty substance of this particular passage. If you had been here, he would not have died. But wait, we are all called to participate in the way and the truth and the life, right? If we enter into that flow, then we too are living in that way. We are living life to the fullest, and we shall not taste death because we have nothing to do with death, right? Then there's the mourners who entered in right after that. And Jesus, in lots of other translations, he gets angry. It's not just that he was troubled. He's angry at the mourners. Why? So, I feel like it's kind of what happened after the shooting, January 23rd. There were a lot of people who said things like, I had no idea. I had no idea people were living like that, And I just have to say, really? Really? You had no idea people were living like that. So you've lived in California for a while, right? Anybody know our California history with farm workers? Cesar Chavez fighting for farm workers' rights for decades. He died fighting for their rights. How about the history of immigration coming up? Or the history of slavery, right? The railroads, the history of slavery in the South. Really, you had no idea this was how we do it around here, right? This country is known for this sort of thing, right? And if you saw the images on the news of the places where the farm workers were living, you'd be shocked, right? It was really interesting. Ray Mueller actually took a photograph of the garden shed that the shooter lived in and posted it on his social media. And there were some other pictures that were floating around too. You know, a cargo container, a cargo shed, a crappy camper trailer kind of thing. You know, yes, this is how people live on farms a lot, right? It's not all the farms, but it's a lot of the farms. There's a problem here. There's a lack of code enforcement. The county has not approached the farms the same way they approach a lot of other things. You know, it probably has to do with just the history of class kinship, and, you know, if you enforce the codes for housing and labor on the farms, they might not allow people to live on their farms anymore, and then you've got a homeless family or 2 or 4. That's part of it. But I think we also have a tendency to like fool ourselves, and we try to ignore and place out of our minds the suffering that is all around us. You know, we want to be able to drive down the 92 and not think about that kind of thing, but it's happening in farms all over the place. I've been on several farms where the housing is really lousy. I mean, it's cold, you can see light through the slats in the walls. I mean, it's just terrible, terrible conditions. So then what happens after Jesus gets angry about the people who are willfully ignorant is they say, "Come and see where Lazarus is." Those 3 words are the 3 words that we all are familiar with from the call of the disciples, right? Come and see the ways of life. But here it's come and see how death has bound humanity and life itself, right? And causes death and suffering. So Jesus responds, he goes, and he's got 3 commandments at this point. Roll away the stone. Come out, Lazarus, and unbind him. And these 3 commands kind of bring to conclusion this story. And we might take them to heart that this is really what we are called to do in our lives when we address those moments where there is violence, oppression, and suffering. You know, maybe it's with your fellow community in Loomis, you know, where there's really fear, right? Talk about living in fear. What are we called to do to go and be a part of the force of life, you know, to be people who stand publicly and unbind that which seeks to cause suffering and death, and to call forth into the light a way and a pathway that is loving and compassionate, right? To reclaim a vision of our faith and of the spirit of our country, you know, to really say we're about freedom and welcome and loving and community, right? And wholeness. Not this scapegoating, divisive, angry, violent path. And then finally, I want to say, as we move toward Eucharist, well, actually, we're not moving towards Eucharist, are we? No. In other churches we do, but as we move forward, considering Eucharist, I want to consider this. Jesus does this great example, you know. He's about to be killed. He's been betrayed already. And he says, share with me this meal. This is my body. This is my blood, right? It would have been a perfect moment if this was a Schwarzenegger film where he would say, you know, all right, if you're really with me, you know, we're going to go kill the Romans this way or that way, right? Even when they're in the garden, and the soldier cuts off the ear of one of the apostles, Jesus heals the ear and says, no, you know, it's not what we're about. We're about healing and life and love. You are to be at peace with yourself, within yourself, peace with your family, your community, and then peace in how you engage the world, Do not hide from the violence and the suffering in the world. There are global issues. As that saying goes, think locally, act globally, or act locally, think globally. Probably both. There's so much on our table, right? Personal, social, global. And all of it matters tremendously. And then finally, when we do share Eucharist, I think it's important to remember, Jesus says, this is who I am, This is who I am. As it happens in John and harkens back to Passover, right? It happens on a Passover. This is my body. What would it be like? So it's not St. Patrick's Day, and he says, this is my body, right? It's not like, he's not hearkening back to some, cultural celebration that doesn't have a lot of depth and power and meaning. He's hearkening back to the very cornerstone celebration of the Hebrew people, where they remember that they were once slaves and they are not to enslave anybody else, right? Where they remember that they were brought out of slavery by this God of love and justice, and they were taught in the desert the ways of sharing and to form groupings, tribes of people who help each other, and that sort of thing. So when Jesus says, this is my body, he's really saying, I think, this is what I'm made of. This story, this great story of Passover, this great story of raising Lazarus, right? This is the stuff that makes me who I am. And if you want to follow me, make this stuff your stuff, right? Like Dan Berrigan says, make your story look a lot more like the gospel, and then following will just be natural, right? Make these concerns your concerns, and you will be people of the light, people of this path of righteousness, people of the resurrection. And then perhaps we can reflect like St. Catherine did. All the way to heaven is heaven. Thank you. I think we have sharing now, if anybody wants to share.